Hi, and welcome to Generous Theology. Today, Chuck and Brock are reflecting on what it means to be an educated person in theology, the importance of soft skills, and the limitations of social media.
Well said. We have one other clarification for me to make there. Of course, you and I met on social media, so I don't want to make it
Yep.
sound like a universally bad thing. I think maybe a clarification on my earlier statement was for reasons that can and should be talked about, you're almost certainly not going to learn good theology from someone that you are not in a long-term relationship with. Now, I'm not, of course, speaking here romantically, but I'm speaking in the context of social media. So much of social media interactions are these combative drive-by events. And so much of social media is about winning the rhetorical debate, being aggressive, overstating your position if it lets you win, inducing aporia in your opponent. And aporia is the Greek word that roughly translates in our language as gotcha. So if you've ever talked to somebody and you've put them in a corner where the brain starts going tilt, that's an aporia moment, a gotcha moment. And because of that structure around social media, you're probably not going to get good teachings from that. Perspective is usually easily lost. Balance, historical accuracy, it's all about winning. It's all about winning the point, and it's all about destroying your opponent, and in 128 characters or less. So it is what it is. It's not completely useless, but if you're a student and you try to learn there and grow there, may the Lord help you, because I feel that's going to really go out poorly. And so the people that you will learn from the most will be the people that you're in longer term conversations with. And I'll just share this. I'll share talking with you. We've met, what was it, about 2 years ago now? Chuck, is that where it's at?
No, it's been 2.5, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. 2.5 years ago now. And it was on social media, but there was a time of talking and discussion. There was a time of regular interactions. And it's the same thing with the other 5 or 6 persons that I've met in 20 years on social media who I can trust. They interact with me from a good faith. Their goal is for me to grow and be more godly, and my goal for them is the same. We aren't trying to destroy each other and win the argument. Don't get me wrong, we would like our arguments to be the winning ones, but if that's the crushing overarching goal, the relationship won't last. And so I just want to encourage people toward that relationship. This sort of comes maybe in 2 dimensions. You have your mentors, and so these are people who are usually older than you or more mature than you in the faith, if not in age, in chronological age. It often works out that way, that your mentor is older than you in age as well, but it's really a maturity thing. And then at some point, the older believers actually need the youth and vibrancy of a mentee, of someone who they can share all of their beautiful knowledge with and that beautiful deposit of faith. And then things transfer over, and it's such a beautiful thing to happen. So both are edified and both have their season. So that's much more important than winning fights, winning arguments on social media. Hopefully that helps some folks there. Chuck, is there any sort of specificity that some individual things, some sort of 1 or 2 key concepts or key resources or materials that you think would, if you were an older mentor figure talking with a mentee, that you would like to share and say, whatever you do, I'm not saying you have to live and die by this resource. This is one of my crown jewels. What would you say?
Yeah, it's going to depend a little bit on the level people that I'm talking to are at. But we talked a little bit before about Berkhoff. And I know that today, I think Berkhoff is a little less popular than he was, in part because we have Bavinck in English. A lot of Berkhoff read and spoke in Dutch and in English. And so he had some of those Dutch language resources, and he introduced them through his lens, some of those Bavinckian ideas through his lens in his works. That isn't to say that they were less valuable for that. In fact, I think they were quite valuable. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Burkhoff is he wrote at a couple of different levels, similar materials, but at a couple of different levels. So you may, in talking to somebody who would like to go a little more in depth, you get the thick systematic theology that he put out. But for people who aren't quite ready for that, he does have the compendium and he does have the manual of Christian doctrine, each one of which is a little thinner than the other, but still gets at the basic material, but gets at it at a level that's appropriate. So that I think it's the manual, which is the smallest one. The manual on Christian doctrine is really extremely useful for whether it's somebody in high school or maybe early in college, or maybe somebody who doesn't have as deep of a knowledge of especially Reformed theology. That it's really good stuff because it's still systematic. He still goes through all the important issues, but he does it at a different level. So I would certainly include Burkhoff in that list of you got to read. And then thinking of people who you may or may not agree with everything that they write, although I would say I agree with him more than I disagree with him. Another really good writer who's dealing, I think, with some important issues. He's not always, because he loves the idea of struggling with ideas and going back and forth. I think sometimes people who are looking to get very specific conclusions from him often are disappointed, or they often come to the conclusions that he's made particular conclusions and other people will agree. But he's written a lot of really good stuff on issues that really need to be dealt with. And you may not agree with all of his conclusions on things. I think one thing that he does model very well is a careful back and forth. Tends to almost dialogue with himself a little bit in his writing, which I think is why sometimes people get a little confused, because one end of the dialogue may be in one direction and another end of the dialogue may be in another. People try to guess which one is the one that he's actually believing. But that method of writing, I think, is helpful too, because I think it's helpful in thinking through the issues oneself, is to read how Wright has also thought through some of these things from a couple of different perspectives. So that would be another person I would add. I know he's not the most popular, especially with the truly reformed kind of folks, but I think he is very worthwhile to read. So those are two that come to mind specifically. Are there some for you and that you would add?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I would love to say that one of the beautiful things about Reformed theology that I admire and treasure is their commitment to putting their thoughts down on paper, or at this stage, digitally. And what I mean is this: when I was studying to be learned in the scriptures back in the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s, I didn't even start my seminary education until the 2000s. And that's a topic for another night. But what I noticed was when I did find Reformed theology, I appreciated the voluminous material that was there. I devoured it. I was a voracious reader of the creeds and the confessions and the systematic theologies. So you mentioned Burkhoff was an early resource for me. Again, like you, this is pre-Bavinck in English. Also, Gordon H. Clark was a great resource for me. And then when I discovered my Confession of Faith, which is the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith, it just felt like home. Something I had been looking for almost 25 years, not quite, but 20 plus years in the Christian faith, knowing that I attached somewhere onto the tree of Reformed theology, but not knowing where. And then one day, it was through Gordon H. Clark, I discovered the Westminster Confession. And after reading Clark's book, What Do Presbyterians Believe?, which was amazing, and I then said to myself, this is it. This is what I believe, only the Baptist form of this. And at that point of time, I didn't know about the 1689 London Baptist Confession. And so there was a time when I was praying to the Lord, can I have the Westminster Confession, but for me, a Baptist? And so when I found that beautiful document, what an answer to prayer and what a joy. There is 10 to 15 years worth of study just in those, I think it's 31 chapters. Just in those 31 chapters is a theology course of study for 10 to 15 years for anybody. But the good news is when you come out of it, you're going to be thoroughly equipped to speak about theological matters in the marketplace of ideas. And so I love those. When I grew up, Chuck, I grew up in an atmosphere that was really the twilight of the idealists and idealism, especially the German forms of idealism. So think here, Kant, Hegel, maybe everybody up to, but not including the young Hegelians in that time period, the early 19th century, was very much in vogue and very popular where I was when I was a boy. And people around me were talking about the noumena and the phenomena and synthetic and analytic truths and distinction. People had the continental speech or type of speaking. And of course, I'm just a boy under 10 years old at this time, but I caught the pace, I caught the rhythm, and I caught the spirit of it, if not the doctrines itself. So there's a freeness, there's a vibrancy to the continental language that I have always admired, even if I was not myself a continentalist or an idealist, which of course I'm not. I grew up in it and was surrounded by that. And so when I found theology, and I found the scholastic side of theology, Gordon H. Clark was a classical theist. And I found something that was very unusual and unlike the philosophy of my youth. And so I studied it and enjoyed it, but also knew that there was going to be this continental voice. And so when I found Herman Bavinck and Gerhardus Voss and G.C. Berkouwer, I knew I was home. And those writers are very commendable. One other contemporary who's still alive and still teaching up near your area, across the lake, is Pastor Greg Nichols, and he's a Reformed Baptist church up in Michigan. And his systematic theology is marvelous. And when I was in seminary, I had a chance to obtain his manuscripts before they were published. And I had access to quite a few of his texts. Only 3 of them, I believe, are actually publicly published now. So the notes I have from the other volumes are really quite rare. And I hope he's able to get the balance of his work published because it really is top notch. Those are interesting influences from my perspective. And Chuck, we didn't get to the juicy gossip here about current events, but I will throw one out to you. And that is, I did receive news that Herman Bavinck's Reformed Ethics, The Duties of the Christian Life, Reformed Ethics Volume 2, will be released next month, scheduled for November the 16th of this year. So how's that for some current events action?
Yeah, no, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't put my order in yet, but I will be doing that in the near future.
Can you feel your wallet becoming progressively lighter in the light of this announcement?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. But I think it could be worse. I haven't seen the price of this one. The first volume was, while expensive for a book, was also not as expensive as it could be. I've seen some of these other volumes going for in the hundreds of dollars, and I don't think that's what we're expecting out of this one. But yeah, it is pretty exciting, and I really enjoyed reading Reformed Ethics with you, and that concept or that whole study of ethics is something that is interesting to me. Definitely looking forward to reading the volume. And I'm really glad that there is a Bavinck Society that is working to get all of his stuff printed in the English language and available. And I think they're getting close to having that all done. That's really been something that's really good about living today, is that we do have that ability to read that stuff in English, and we can study it even if ik spreek geen Nederlands. I don't speak any Dutch.
My friend, thank you. Thank you for a beautiful time of discussion. And I hope and pray for a great rest of the week for you.